buses, surprisingly, and we did have a helpful conversation at Budget Committee yesterday about some bus subjects, so I will try not to repeat myself. But overall, in the context of the challenges that we all know our bus network currently faces, can you set out how the plans for the network over this business plan period will going to improve reliability and connectivity for London's communities, particularly those who rely on the bus for vital journeys and don't have other options?
Yes, very important question. So the first thing is, one of the things that we've looked into is what encourages somebody to use a bus and what encourages them to not use a bus. And one of the big factors is unreliability. If you can't be confident you'll get from A to B in X minutes, you will not use a bus. And so we've got to make those journeys more reliable. The biggest reasons for a journey being unreliable is roads being dug up, frankly speaking, or congestion. And so the TfL business plan, which covers 4 years, has a lot of detail, including expenditure, to try and address the issues of this. And the sort of measures being talked about is enhanced bus priority, traffic reduction measures, a simplified inner London bus route, traffic control systems, and infrastructure upgrades. And the other two things to say in terms of making progress here is the work TfL are doing with councils in terms of bus priority measures, and there are now some boroughs who are the sort of pioneer pilot boroughs for the better bus partnerships, and this will lead to, hopefully, we think, better reliability. We'll be testing those with KSI. If we can see improvements of bus reliability in those boroughs, they'll be rolled out in other boroughs as well. What we don't want to do is do a massive rollout now in 32 boroughs and it doesn't work, and or the entire city dug up. So we've got to be very careful about doing this. So hopefully she'll see over the next period some improvements. Final thing is the express buses are incredibly reliable because they're stopping at a few bus stops and because they tend to have guaranteed bus lanes. And so we're trying to get more of our roads where it's possible to have reserved bus lanes as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely, and the Superloop has been and continues to be a hugely important addition to our network. You mentioned simplified bus routes in inner London, and that does make me nervous because while obviously we do need to make sure that the money that we're spending on buses, because we do subsidise buses quite rightly, is going in the right places, what we are seeing is some of the changes to the inner London and central London bus services, which must look great on a map and a spreadsheet, are going to impact some people who need the bus, older Londoners, younger Londoners, low-income Londoners. And I've had lots of conversations recently about the 38 and the 19, and there are many other examples across inner London, even where sometimes TfL have previously withdrawn their ideas as not being appropriate, and then they've come back and put them forward again. So will you take away that we just need to be very careful when we're simplifying bus routes to make sure that we are mitigating or even just deciding that it's not a good idea when they're having a bad impact on all sorts of groups who don't have options?
Well, Chair, the member knows about this because she's been successful in stopping changes in the past.
Well, they've come back. They've come back, Sadiq.
Let me explain to the member the thinking, is this. The TfL has to keep every bus route under review. There are 700 bus routes, 700 bus routes, take or leave. And the use changes depending on a number of factors. One is a recognition that in central and inner London there are alternatives to the bus that weren't there before. Micromobility has completely transformed how people get around central and inner London: e-scooters, e-bikes, and so she'll have seen, as I have, double-decker buses which are just empty, and they're very frequent, but they're very empty. That can't be right, and so TfL does look at where they can improve things, but she's right to give a word of warning to TfL to just make sure they are doing qualitative work as well as the quantitative work to make sure the individuals she's talking about who for whom that bus is essential aren't inconvenienced in a way that can't be properly addressed.
Yeah, no, and I do understand, but I mean, if we see an empty tube, we don't suggest taking it away because, of course, it's much more difficult to change the tube. So it's
it also doesn't need savings. So actually, unlike tubes, on a serious note, unlike tubes, reducing frequency doesn't save much money on a tube. Increasing frequency on a tube does bring in money. And the bus is a bit different.
Yeah, it is, because of who's using them. But on another subject, apologies, because I'll just talk about buses for ages. Ask about private hire licensing, which is an issue that's just come up in the, particularly on the last few days. And it's not about the renewals of existing drivers, which I have to say, we're seeing a major reduction in those problems, and our credit TfL to have finally seemed to have got on top of that. But this is about a huge backlog of new drivers, or people who want to become private hire drivers, who are contacting us as they're facing lengthy delays and feel that they have a feeling that they're being restricted from working because they have an expectation they'll be able to put in an application, they'll get their licence, they'll be able to get out and earn money. Now, when you've got a backlog of, I think it's around 4,000 at the moment, that's not really realistic. And also, we can't simply just issue a private hire licence to anyone who wants to drive because of the impact, congestion, earnings and everything like that. But I won't get into why we need a cap on private hire licence. But the reason this is a budget question, you might ask, is because we are taking money, or TfL is taking money from new drivers up front, which of course seems to make sense, but they are then waiting months or sometimes years, which obviously they think, I've paid my money, I've got my medical, I've got my DBS, I've paid for all this, and then I'm getting nothing back, in some cases for over a year. There seems to be just something wrong here. I did write to the Finance Committee and suggest that they delay putting up the prices. I don't think they listened, but I do think there's something wrong overall about this idea that we're taking money from new people, from Londoners, and they're not able to give them what they're expecting. So could you take that away and have a look at it?
Yeah, but I can, but simply, can she let me know the individual cases?
I mean, I could, but there's a lot of them. But
not now.
Yeah,
I mean, offline.
yeah.
Let me know, and I'll follow that personally.
I'm happy to take it offline, but it's systemic rather than individual. So, yeah, thanks, Chair.
Okay, just before we continue with questioning, I think it is appropriate that we pay tribute to Mark, who's in the audience. The Assembly, just to remind you, has already indicated its thanks to his work. And I really do want to say thank you for what you've done. You've suffered terribly. Now, let's return back to our questioning. So, Assembly Member Boff.
Now that the National Federation of the Blind have exposed the data that TfL uses to justify floating bus stops as deeply flawed, why have you not included a provision for a programme to remove floating bus stops where they have been ill-advisedly installed?
So, Chair, if it was the case that TfL needed to withdraw any floating bus stop, the monies within the budget the TfL budget, we're talking about the TfL budget rather than the GLA budget, would cover that.
The existing budget will cover it.
So the current TfL business plan has within it provision to cover any hypothetical withdrawal of a floating bus stop, yep.
And will you contact the National Federation of the Blind to allow them to explain to you why TfL's modelling is so very, very wrong?
I'm more than happy to get the details of them and make contact with the relevant organisation.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Garrett. It's you, sorry. Yes.
Morning. So yesterday we discussed TfL buses and how they're on an unsustainable trajectory. The Commissioner has warned that within a few years there's a serious crunch coming. Today I'd like to ask you about another serious unsustainable problem at TfL, which is about capital renewals, which in normal language is making sure all the bridges and tunnels and railways that we rely on are maintained properly and don't fail. TfL reckon that they need about £1.2 billion a year. You're giving them about £0.8 billion a year. So TfL told us at the Budget Committee they're £400 million a year short. I would characterise that as a managed decline situation. My perception is that you don't seem to treat it as seriously as it needs treating. Do you think you're giving it the regard it needs?
Well, it's worth going back a step and reminding ourselves why there's been a reduction in renewals in TfL since 2015. The genesis...
It's because you don't take it seriously, Mr Mayor, that's why.
We can either have commentary or we can have Mayor's question time. So the genesis of this is the decision taken by the previous Mayor Boris Johnson and the previous Conservative government
He left office a decade ago, Mr Mayor.
to cut the operating grant, which is recurring in perpetuity. So on a recurring basis, every year, including 25-26 and 26-27, we're losing billions of pounds that we otherwise would have received. Now, if you add billions of pounds over 10 years, the member's concerned about the 10-year passage, that is tens of billions of pounds we've lost, which is tens of billions of pounds not invested in capital and renewals and enhancements. So what I've managed to do, because of the very good new government we have since July 2024, is secure something we've not done for some time, which is a long-term capital deal of £2.2 billion over 4 years. By the way, the last annual capital deal from the previous government was £250 million a year. So it's more than double that. What we'll do over the next 3-4 years of the TfL business plan is increase the amount of money we spend on renewals, not as high as I'd like it to be, but it's still much higher than it's been since the previous mayor and the previous government reached this ridiculous decision. And so next year, 26-27, will be the most since 2015, and 27-28 will be more than 2015. And what we're hoping is, because of the long-term deal we have, being able to do the same amount of work in terms of renewals for less money, because of having the right deals with the private sector and in-house as well.
Yeah, so just to be clear, because you're doing the same thing as yesterday, a decade and more of history which you conveniently truncate. At no point in your mayoralty has the amount of money going into capital renewals been adequate. And you're trying to tell us now, by the way, the TfL business plan shows it rising a bit and then falling again. You didn't quote the future years. My concern is we've seen multiple bridges, these are council-owned bridges, but multiple bridges closing. We haven't yet seen a TfL asset fail to the point that a railway line has to be shut, or a bridge or a tunnel has to be shut for safety. We are on a trajectory, £400 million a year, too little going into it. This is your choice, it's your budget. You've been here a decade, despite your repeated reference to previous mayor. Surely it's only a matter of time before it's a TfL asset that's making the news because it's been closed and a service has been shut down for safety purposes. At what point are you going to get to the capital maintenance meeting what TfL say that they need? Not a lower figure that you reckon you can somehow figure out. They say 1.2 billion, and I'm inclined to believe them. When are you going to deliver that much money?
Well, I do like this anger the Conservatives have suddenly discovered since July 2020.
I'm quite angry that our bridges might fall down, Mr Mayor. Stop changing the subject. When are you going to maintain them properly?
And the mock extra angry man we see as well. We're just turning up the gears.
You think Londoners wouldn't mind if bridges and tunnels closed because you're not maintaining them? You think they'd be chill about that, do you?
We've got a situation. Senator McGarrett used the word chill. So we've had since 2000, TfL set up 2000. From 2000 to 2016, he doesn't talk about history, there was a deficit every year in TfL. What supported TfL was an operating grant from the previous government. Operating grant and a deficit. We've had the operating grant taken away from TfL since 2015. And what have we done since 2016? Year on year reduced the deficit. So for the first time in the history of TfL, 2 years ago, we've got a surplus. And for the last 3 years, we've had a surplus in TfL. Never done before, being done now. We've also had from the central government not only a cut in operating grant, a cut in capital support as well, which means, I've got the numbers here, some years, because of lack of support from the government, we've only spent £388,000 in
he's
renewals.
Rambling and
what we've managed to
off
do
the topic.
is increase that from £388 million to now 800 and then 863. Now, of course I want to spend more in renewals. Of course I do.
Chair,
of course TfL will do. This is the legacy of a decision made by the previous mayor and the previous
Mr Mayor, the surplus is fictional because you create it by underfunding capital maintenance. It's obvious you don't take it seriously. That's the answer to my question. Thank you, Chair.